Good morning, everyone. My name's David Broom. Thanks very much for giving up your time this morning to listen to me talk about a very important topic, something that is no doubt very important to your business, whatever sector you're in, and that's the topic of sales. Now, the one thing that I don't want to do is blabber on too much to the point where you fall asleep on this call. Luckily, I can't see you if that does happen. What rather I would like to do is focus on something that is a little bit different this morning, and that's the psychology of selling. Because when you are setting out to create an effective sales strategy for your business, you're going to have to look at more than just what it is that you're selling in the first place and look right around the edges to form a sales strategy. Before I go in, there's a few learning outcomes, and I want you to know a little bit about what makes me qualified to talk about these and this topic broadly today. By the end of the webinar, I'm quite keen for you to understand how to identify some of the main sales challenges that are going to impact your business. No doubt you'll have a feel for what these look like already, but I want to touch on some of what my experience tells me these look like, then to discover why it's crucial to address these challenges early on. That's not always possible. Some people on this call will have been in business, and in some cases I know, in a couple of cases I know that it's been more than 2 decades in business. But if you can just wipe this slate clean for the purposes of the next half an hour to 40 minutes, then I'm going to address exactly what these challenges look like and why it's crucial to address them now, irrespective of the stage of business you're at. Then we'll look at how to implement some effective sales strategies and how those strategies will help you to overcome those common sales challenges. Then I want you to understand the potential benefits of attending your sales strategies early doors. Things like increased revenue will come into play, more productive sales teams, etc. And then we'll look at the longer term benefits. But a little bit about me first, if you don't mind. Again, my name's David Broom. I'm based in the Northeast. You'll hear from my accent. I'm not from here. I'm an adopted Geordie. My wife is from Newcastle. I am originally from Glasgow, and I've always been in sales. Now, I didn't know this until I was about 29 years old. I went for a job interview with a construction company, and they asked if I had any sales experience because my CV told them that I didn't. In actual fact, that's not the case. From the age of 8, I worked on a very busy market stall in Glasgow with my mum and dad. We sold, and you can see from this slide, that's not my mum, but we sold secondhand clothes, shoes, handbags, and the demographic through this market in Glasgow, which was called Blockhairn Market, were poorer working class Glaswegians and a lot of immigrants from the east of Europe, places like Bosnia, Estonia, and then Northern Africa. And prevalent were Egyptians, Moroccans, who had moved over to Glasgow. Latterly, after the Gulf War, we had people from Kuwait, and then following 1995 into the early 2000s, we had people from Pakistan, India, Afghanistan. There was this cultural concoction in Glasgow. The banter was amazing, the vibe was amazing, but I didn't realise that it was my first exposure to sales. That was from 8 years old. I was born 1983. I worked in that market with my mum until 2022. She would be there every weekend. Now, during the week, this market was a fruit market, and it would ship fruit and vegetables to supermarkets as a distribution channel all over the UK, but predominantly in Glasgow, the east of Scotland and northern England. Then at the weekend, you would have this huge car boot sale on the outside and an internal market, and that's where my mum was. She sold second-hand clothes, etc. Now, in the early 90s, my dad was made redundant. He was in roofing, and he got the opportunity to move to Kuwait after the Gulf War, and then latterly was seconded to Tanzania. Now, bearing in mind, we'd been working on this market stall with people from all over the world, learning the tricks of the trade from a sales and bargaining perspective. We had a lot of bargaining tactics. The guys from Egypt love to bargain and haggle us down on price. People from Eastern Europe were very proud of their families. They wanted to introduce us to their kids, etc. We got to know people, and culture was very, very important to me. And what I was obsessed with early doors was why people bought the things that they bought. What created buyer habits? What was it that was triggering these people to come onto the market stall in the first place? Why were they buying second-hand clothes, for example? What was it that made them come back time and again? Why was it that they learned to trust my mum over a period of, in some cases, 5 and 10 years? When we moved to Africa, it was a difficult experience for my mum and I, predominantly because my dad had been there for about a year, we went out and it was a different experience. Africa is a huge continent, lots of stigmas attached to it. Tanzania is a beautiful country. The capital is Dar es Salaam. And during our time there, we saw the huge divide between rich and wealthy and poor. And you see that in places like the Northeast and certainly in Glasgow, but it was very prevalent in Tanzania. And again, as a young lad, now 11 years old, I was really consumed by this. And it was very market heavy. When we left Africa, we came back to Glasgow and my mum started the stall again and we got right back at it. And the one thing that I realized quite early on was that there were a couple of items of clothing, types of clothing that flew off the rails, so to speak. Football shirts, golf jumpers, and then big sizes. You're talking size 28 plus in some cases for women, and similar sizes for men. And they would fly off the rails. And it was particular people that were buying these. Man United, my football team, no doubt there'll be a few that just jump off the webinar at this stage, had just won the treble in 1999. I was 16 years old. And I got chatting to this guy who loved to buy football shirts from us. But it took 2 years for me to understand that what he was doing was distributing these Celtic and Rangers tops, Manchester United and Liverpool tops. That was the four that he wanted. He would take other tops, but he wanted those four. And we'd keep them aside and sell them about 6:30 on a Sunday morning in bulk to this guy. And he was sending them to the USA and Canada. And basically what happened was there was expats over there who coached football teams. And their football teams were Celtic, Rangers, Man United, Liverpool. And they wanted all the kids in their clubs, their respective clubs, kitted out in those tops. And what I found was that he was doing this online. Now, e-commerce was very much in its infancy at this stage, talking very early 2000s now. And I said to my mum and dad, I think we should try this. So over the period of the next 6 months or so, we bought a digital camera. We learned what it was to take pictures, upload the pictures onto a PC at that stage, shrink them down in size using paint. And, it was very, very rusty and very rustic back in the early 2000s. But we started to develop an eBay business. I moved it all online. Now, bearing in mind, I was pretty obsessed by culture, the cultural differences of the people on the market stall, my experience of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, understanding one thing was that people needed the same stuff. They all bought food, they all needed water, they all needed shelter, they all needed clothes. And I moved some of those items onto an eBay store. And it was just an accidental consequence of a few conversations with that guy that was shipping material over to the States. And over the period of about 2 years, I built a very successful business. I was selling football shirts, golf jumpers, and big sizes. And again, I was making it up as I went along, but I did really well. But then I got cocky. There was someone who came onto the stall and said, guys, you really should be selling fashion jewelry. So I did that. I went and found a supplier in Manchester. And he said, there's these things called charm bracelets. And I'm telling you right now, mate, they're going to fly off the shelves. You buy the bracelet, it comes with one charm. And through time, people can buy more charms for their bracelet. So I tried selling them. And he was right. They were really popular at the market and they were really popular in eBay. But with the charm bracelets, I also bought things like chunky bangles and necklaces. But it led me to a suspension, which exists to this day. Now, didn't go to jail. Thought I might have went to jail. I genuinely was panicking. This little boy, this adolescent in Glasgow, with a mum who was a market stall trader, with a dad who was in roofing. Neither of them came from money. Neither of them had been in this position where there was a business building. Nothing happened. It was actually a claim to fame in the end because it was Chanel themselves who said, this guy's selling counterfeit Chanel jewelry online and he probably shouldn't be doing that. And they were dead right looking back. All of the funds in PayPal were absorbed, given back to customers. I missed out. I got a fright and I actually found myself falling within myself. Now, I don't come from a world where money is spent frivolously. It was counted. Every penny my mum was counting at the market was first to make sure we could actually pay the organisers, Blocker and Market themselves. I was part of that vicious cycle where money was there to buy the necessities and nothing else. And I became quite scared of it. So I was at college, went to university, and 6 weeks later, I decided to drop out. And the reason that I dropped out was quite straightforward. I looked around and thought that everyone was more academically minded than me. I felt that they were meant to be there, that they were supposed to be at university, and that I just wasn't. I'd got a fright with this eBay business. From the proceeds, I'd bought my first property in Glasgow. I was young, I felt entrepreneurial, but I got a real fright. And I didn't really have any mentorship around me to drive me forward. After 6 weeks of being in university, I landed a job in a local authority planning department in Glasgow. Local authority planning felt very safe, quite comforting. There was flexi time and a stable salary, and it was really all the wrong motivators. Did that for 4 years, but to climb the career ladder, guess what I needed? I needed that bit of paper. So I went back to university. And I thought that by going back to university, that I would get that bit of paper and that the world would be my oyster. And of course, I was wrong. I left 2009. The market had crashed a year earlier. There were fewer graduate training schemes. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my dad said to me, there's a company in construction and they want someone to be in the UK and to launch the business in the UK. You'd be first boots on the ground. It's a great opportunity. And I was so offended because it was a sales role. And when I went for that opportunity, I went for that job interview. That's when I was first asked the question, do you have any sales experience? And at 28 years old, I said, no, because everything that I've just told you there, I didn't realize was actually relevant. It wasn't part of the story at that point. I just wasn't able to join the dots between what I'd done in the past and what I was being asked to do then. But I convinced them to give me the job, and convinced them is the right phrase to use. It took 3 interviews, and eventually I started up a business in Glasgow, and it did really well. It's doing really well to this day. We opened up international offices. We grew the team. We were growing the team by the dozen. We were adding millions of pounds onto revenue. And genuinely, I thought I had it all. My ego was inflated. I was loving the sales process. I was loving the challenge of taking a challenger brand and creating some form of market leadership in micro niches of the likes of Glasgow, west of Scotland, northeast and northwest of England, and starting to branch across the UK. There were people reporting into me. I had the job title. I got to wear the suit. I had the company car. I was traveling all over the world. All of these things were pure vanity metrics. But the reality was I had to give it all up. And the reason I gave it all up was because I was doing less of what I knew I was good at, less of what I loved, which was essentially being in and around sales, working with people, understanding buying habits, understanding the psychology of selling. And that's when I started my own business, B7 Associates. B7 Associates is essentially a consultancy business. I hold board advisory and non-exec directorship roles with a host of companies who essentially want to create value in their businesses. And these are some of those companies here. For example, some of you in the Northeast might know the Newcastle Eagles. We have Fintegrate in the financial technology sector. We've got companies in engineering. We've got companies in recruitment and software. There's an investment company that I launched last year. There's a new co about to launch in August of this year, which is all very exciting. You guys know Umi, and I'm also a football coach up at Blythe Spartans. And the reason that I mention all of this is quite relevant, and I want to touch back on it throughout today's presentation. So my take on sales is that, given what I've just told you, everybody is doing it. Whether or not we actually know it, whether or not we can articulate that we are in sales, my argument is that every single person on this call is a salesperson. Whether that's trying to convince our partners to go somewhere they don't want to go, or our children to do something that they don't particularly want to do, or even those kids trying to convince us to give them something that we know isn't really good for them. Everybody's selling something. But when you're in business, sales becomes, in my opinion, the most important aspect of all organizations. If you want to create value in a business, you have to take sales seriously. And sometimes that's a matter of joining the dots between what you've done before, what your business plan is, your North Star is, where you're going in the future. The reality is that the answers to unlock your sales doors are already there. You already know what they are. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the common challenges that you'll find if you're working with sales teams or you are in sales yourselves. Now, I want to make these slides accessible to you, so I'm not going to read every single word. If you've got time to read through them as I chat away, then by all means do that. But I will speak to the team at Umi and we'll get these slides over to you so you can read in your own time. You'll look at your business and you'll say, our sales are going down. Now, that's a big problem. It's a sign that the business is struggling in some way, shape, or form. And I want to talk today about how you can rectify that. You might look at the amount of money you have to spend in order to bring someone over the line as a buyer of your business in the first place. Now, if it's costing the business far too much to acquire those customers, then you have to look at whether or not that's a necessity in the early stage, or whether or not you have to refine your process in order to alleviate those issues. We look at low conversion rates. That's not always applicable to only online businesses. You can actually apply metrics to determine whether or not you are converting at a low rate, even if you're not online. I want to touch on a couple of examples of this later on in the presentation as well. If you do have an online shop, you might see that you might have an online Shopify store or an Etsy store, for example, and you can see how many people are bringing your products or your items into their carts and then not doing anything with it. My wife has a small business called Bay Fudge Co. She makes homemade plant-based fudge. She has a Shopify store, and she can see how many people are landing her products in their basket and how many of them actually follow through to pay. And there's actually an awful lot, a surprising number of items in baskets, and nothing ever happens with them. So you have to look at how you address that. We're looking at things like poor customer feedback. That's really going to impact your business because your brand is everything. And your brand is essentially what other people say about it. So it's important that we look at what people are saying about your business, and not just the people that you deal with now, but importantly, the people who don't, whether or not there's any barriers to entry in terms of new business. We'll look at the potential for you to stretch out of a micro niche and whether or not your micro niche or your markets are far too limited in size. It may be that you have targets in your mind and are not actually applicable to your true target customers. You might also be losing staff. Now, that doesn't always necessarily come down to brand. If you're a startup, and I want to give you an example of this as we speak now, if you're a startup, it's not for everybody. A lot of people on this webinar, I'm sure, will be in the startup mentality. You'll be in startup businesses, and it's very, very difficult for you to convince someone who is maybe in a stable job with a more stable organization, who have benefited from the longevity of experience. Maybe they've been around for 10, 15 years, to jump ship and join you. I've been there with the construction company I was a big part of, and I'm also there now with Fintegrate, one of my financial technology businesses. We struggle to sell the dream because we are a very young business. And so what can happen is that you employ the wrong people, and you have to look at why you're doing that in the first place and why people are leaving your organization. That's really important. Otherwise, sales won't take care of itself the way that you want it to. And then, very broadly speaking, you have to question whether or not your strategy works. And in some cases, do you even have one? I work with a lot of businesses on a consultancy basis, and they think they know what they're doing. They think they know what it is they have to do in order to sell. But in actual fact, there's no defined process behind anything that they do. And therefore, the metrics start to fall apart. That affects targets, and it affects the attitudes of potential customers. And in some cases, even your existing ones. So these are all signs and symptoms of a flailing and perhaps even failing sales strategy, and addressing them early doors is really critical if you want to start to improve your overall sales cycle. To give you a couple of examples of clients, these are hands-on examples of businesses that I work with. When I started working with the Newcastle Eagles, they really didn't have a sales strategy. Coming out of COVID, brand new arena. It might be that some of you have actually been to the arena on Scotswood Road. If you haven't, new season starts in September. You have to get yourself along. I don't come from basketball. I'm a football guy, born and bred in a city that lives and breathes football. I didn't know the game at all. I was introduced to Paul, who's the guy in the shirt and trousers here, and Paul Blake is the owner of the Eagles. And the one thing that the Eagles had to look at was how they drive value into the business from a commercial perspective. They've got lots of different sales avenues. They have their merchandising and ticket sales, but they also have corporate sponsorship, hospitality sales, and then there's the hiring out of the arena itself. So there's multiple income streams to the Eagles, but there was no process or strategy underpinning that. And what we've been able to do by applying a very basic sales strategy is not only identify all the important metrics, but identify what was working, what was creating pounds, shillings, and pence in the bottom line and bringing value into the business across each of those revenue streams in the first place, and what wasn't working, more importantly. And we've honed that. We've increased the value drivers into the business by over 200% in under 12 months. huge increase in wealth into the business, into the basketball club. And what that means is that they can put more money behind their foundation, which supports kids in the community, more money behind both the men's and women's teams, and then look to expand the arena, which makes it more accessible for more people and creates more revenue streams that are underpinned by those processes. Looking at Fintegrate, that's myself with my two business partners at Fintegrate, and we had a really high cost of acquisition. Now, in this case, what that meant was that we were spending an absolute fortune on social media advertising, Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, and the amount of money that we were spending versus the amount of demos that we were booking from that spend was very high. So the cost per click and the cost per demo booked was very, very high. And that doesn't even take into consideration the necessary conversion rates that we had to achieve in order to make that a viable spend in the first place. So we were spending far too much money. We were creating a headache for ourselves. And what we had to look at was a complete change in strategy to win our customers from other segments of the market through introductions from people in that space, leveraging people that we knew in the industry who could bring demos to us through introductions, looking at introducer agreements, looking at things that would only cost us money if we actually succeeded in the first place. And with that spend, we then had a pot of cash to reinvest into digital marketing. But at that point, we had the collateral from existing customers to bring into our digital marketing channels and therefore create the attention necessary for more people to book on, which lowered the cost per click, lowered the cost per demo. So it's really important to understand why it's important to spend, but why it's also important to continuously evaluate that spend against proven metrics and against proven results. So what are some of the benefits or what are some of the important factors to consider rather in addressing your sales challenges early? Well, there's a huge cost to delaying it. I've been there, I've had my head in the sand in the past where I've hoped that what I was doing, because it felt good, it felt safe, would work eventually. That doing the right things in the right way at the right time, to my mind, was always going to work. For the most part, it does through time, but there are occasions where it absolutely doesn't, and you don't know what you don't know. There's a lot of generalisms there, but sometimes we need to understand, well, if we don't do the things that we're meant to do now, then we're actually going to impact our sales in the long term. And that could seriously impact our business. You look at companies like Blockbuster, Kodak, companies who might seem like the low-hanging fruit, but companies who had the opportunity to adapt to new market trends and changes in the market and didn't. And the cost of delay was absolutely astronomical. In fact, there was a finality around it. But even in a more small sense in the SME markets, if you let your problems grow, then it's going to be more costly in the long run. You have to address issues now. If you do that, then you're giving yourself half a chance of actually increasing sales in the shorter term. You might be able to gain a competitive advantage as well. Now, the one thing that I realised in construction, which was in the micro niche of roofing and cladding, is a very saturated market, quite a volatile market because of the level of competition. I had to look at the things that were going to give us a competitive advantage. What do you do if your business sells a product that, in actual fact, customers could buy from a number of different outlets or businesses? What is it you do to give yourself a competitive advantage? Sometimes that's through the use of language. Sometimes it's through the use of marketing. But by addressing your issues, what you inevitably do is you start to better understand the things that genuinely work. And by leveraging those things, you start to gain an advantage over your competitors who might be a little bit lazy, who might not be reevaluating processes, almost certainly aren't. And it means that you are humble enough to constantly reevaluate where you are as a business, to understand maybe for the first time, how is it I'm going to sell this thing? How is it I'm going to sell this service, this idea, this prospect, this product, this service? What is it that I do? What do I need to sell? And how do I need to address things now in order that I have the process that allows me to alleviate future headaches? Or for those of you who are having current headaches, how do we alleviate them now? I want to give you an example of how regulation change, legislation change can impact a market. I'll do that in the next slide, but it's really important that you know your markets intrinsically to the point where you're encyclopedic around the market and your product, how both of them fit together and change as legislation and regulation around those markets do. You'll then make more money. If you can address sales issues early and actually get to work on selling, more money comes into your business. I gave you the example of the Newcastle Eagles, but this is true for every organization. If you have an organization that's making money through sales, then it can reinvest that money into additional staff, marketing channels, into the extension of a premises like the Vertu Motors Arena. That was the example I gave. How do you extend an arena? Well, you either take on debt, you take on government funds, or you work with venture capitalist firms, you work with funders, angel investors, or you wash your own face and you bring your own money to the table and you can reinvest that back into the business. So there's economic opportunities that come from addressing your sales challenges very early on in your life cycle. And then how do you manage your reputation? Well, if you don't address sales challenges early on, people are going to start forming the wrong sort of opinion about your brand. And again, if a brand can be summarized as something that other people say about your company, or maybe even about you if you're a solopreneur, then it's really important to address what's not going right very early on. And it might even be you only work with a very small pool of customers in order to get your product right before you launch it to market. And again, I'll touch back on that. Here's an example, as I mentioned, of how legislation change and regulatory change within the construction sector can change a business like Moi. Most of you, I would expect all of you will remember the tragic Grenfell disaster, and how it impacted not just the lives of those involved, but all of us across the UK. The construction industry were completely shocked by what happened. Now, the business I worked with were a specification-led organisation, and what that means is that they specified construction products to architects, to building surveyors, to decision makers in a number of authorities across many sectors. So the products that failed at Grenfell failed for very particular reasons. And it meant that there had to be a holistic overview, an overarching synopsis of the industry to ask questions about what it was to specify products, what products were fit for purpose on these types of buildings, why what happened, what was it that happened in the first place, and why was it allowed to happen, and where else might it happen now? And how do we as an industry change those things? How do we change this before it's too late? And that meant that businesses like the company I worked for and all of their competitors, not just in the flat roofing and cladding markets, but holistically speaking across construction, had to look at the validity and feasibility of their products. And it meant in some cases, some products were shelved and done away with for good. Some were retested to ensure that they were either bettered or made appropriate or justified as being appropriate in the first place. And it meant that the way that that business that I worked with went to market fundamentally shifted and changed overnight. So why would you want to implement an effective sales strategy in the first place? I've come up with 7 steps that I go through with every organization I work with. Unfortunately, what we can't do is wave a magic wand. If I was to sit with any of you as business owners and say, let's run through each of these 7 steps in 10 minutes, and 70 minutes later, you're going to have this sales process that basically takes away all your headaches, then you know that I would be telling a few fibs there. That's not how consultants should work, and that's not how business owners should really apply their mindsets. Rather, this is me taking a very deep dive into what it means to run a business. Bearing in mind, my argument is that everyone in an organization is selling. Everyone. It could be people that are answering phones to customers. They are the very first people that your customers hear. There's front of house. It could be people that are driving vehicles to deliver goods. It's part of your brand. It could be your online presence, the invisibility that surrounds it. It's still echoing your values. You have to have a sales plan. That sales plan has to be very, very broad. And when I work with businesses, I go very granular into what it is to build a sales plan. You're looking at the company's values, its mission, its North Star, what it is it's actually trying to achieve, and how do you disseminate information through an organization and to your external stakeholders, your customers, the people that are going to buy from you, to ensure that that sales plan is made known to everyone that impacts your organization. Then I would look at how a customer behaves. Now, bearing in mind, I would look at a very young age, what clothes were flying off the shelves, who was buying them, and why. And taking that knowledge, I carved out an opportunity for myself as a young lad in Glasgow. Making big mistakes is irrelevant, actually. It's the underlying truth that we can all pair and map together the buying habits of our customers and the products that we sell. We have to look at the behavior of a market's buyers in order to understand how to communicate to them and how to position our products. At this point and right throughout, you then have to look and say, we've got a sales plan, we understand our customers and we're selling to them. Is it working? And that constant refining of a process is something that I feel that most businesses get wrong. I am sitting here today telling you that I get this wrong. So I'm not sat here telling you that I get this right every day, because I definitely don't. This is a constant reevaluation, not reinventing the wheel, but taking stock of what is there already, what have we defined as a process, and is it working? Then we'll measure the effectiveness of those changes through time. So we'll say, okay, here's what we were doing to sell to our customers. Here's how we were communicating to them. We were spending £1,000 every single month on Facebook ads, or £1,000 every single month on LinkedIn ads. It wasn't working. Therefore, we've adjusted the process. 6 months later, we're going to go back and we're going to do the exact same thing again. We're going to spend £1,000 a month on Facebook ads, £1,000 a month on LinkedIn ads. What was the difference having done that thing in between, having refined our process and optimized it? Can we now measure the effectiveness of those changes? You have to look at the way that you deal with your customers. Now, I've worked with a lot of organizations who really do get this right. It sounds a bit cliche, but when we talk about customer service, it can't just be the customers external to your business. How do we speak to our staff? How do we make sure that the staff who are dealing with those customers on a daily basis, because I'm assuming as business owners, you either do that thing just now but don't want to in the future, or you do that thing just now and you absolutely won't be able to do that thing in the future in order to grow. You need other people to sell for you. How do you ensure that everyone is a cohesive unit, that they understand the sales process, that they understand the customers, that they understand what changes are being applied to optimize a process through time? They understand the KPIs or the measurements that are being built around a particular sales task, and they can then communicate that to customers in a way that ensures that those customers continuously feed back into the sales plan, continuously feed back into the bottom line. Looking at industry trends and asking yourself whether or not what you're doing right now is always going to work in the future, and then leveraging technology in order to facilitate that. So is your business impacted by the dawn of AI, as an example? Has your business been impacted by, or your industry been impacted by regulatory change? And how do you leverage technology in your business in order to do everything in the most streamlined manner possible? Could that be leveraging things like CRM tools or automated outreach systems? As an example, I work with a recruitment business in Glasgow, national organisation headquartered in Glasgow. I'm a non-exec there, and one of the key tasks of my directorship of that business has been to bring technology to the floor that would allow the business to scale. Now, recruitment necessitates conversations. The product walks and talks within recruitment. That's candidates and clients. So how you leverage your sales and marketing message within a recruitment business has become increasingly complex. And that's just not necessarily the case for recruitment, but also for your own organizations. McCormack Partners leveraged CRM tools, automation software in order to say, all of these little micro tasks that are very important but that are taking up time could be automated online, so that there is a funnel that allows me as a business owner to communicate with my customers in a way that meets their needs, in a way that communicates my brand, but in a way that doesn't take up my time. So leveraging technology for your business is something that if you're not doing already, you should be looking at, and you are absolutely going to be forced into doing in the future, because of course there have been huge recent advancements in technology that affect almost all markets. So what are the benefits of tending to your sales strategies? Well, the bottom line has to improve. You want increased revenue into the business, and the more money you have, the more good that you can do with your organization and the more that you can grow it. You're going to increase the profit into the business. Now, bearing in mind, I'll be preaching to the converted, but I've worked with organizations where the bottom line meant revenue, and to hell with profit. Now, sticking with construction, we've seen some horror stories in the Northeast because of that sort of mantra. You have to look at both. At the end of the day, the only way to be able to spend more money in your business is if you have profit that allows you to do that. So when we're looking at a sales process and a sales strategy, we also have to look at what we want that to mean in terms of pounds, shillings, and pence of revenue and pounds, shillings, and pence of profit. It's going to give you more time. Now, that could be, in the example I gave previously with McCormack Partners, that could mean that by leveraging technology, which is a huge headache for you just now. You're doing everything on your own, you're resource poor, you're time poor. How do we automate critical tasks in order that you can free up more time, not necessarily to spend walking the dog or on the golf course or sleeping in bed later in the morning? You can do those things as a business owner if you wish, but how do you free up more time to do more of what you're good at? More communication with customers, generating more sales, allowing you to fund the automation of your processes even more. Creating a competitive advantage over your sales competitors. At the end of the day, most businesses don't do the things that they know that they should do. Most business owners are working in their business as opposed to on their business. That's exactly what I do with my consultancy business. I try to help them to step away from that, to take a more overarching, holistic view of their business and identify the pain points so that they can then start to make amends and put in place the correct parameters to grow their business through time. Give peace of mind, not only to your sales team, not only to your customers, but to you as business owners. How can I take away some of these headaches now so that I can stop worrying about all of these things that stop me from doing the things that I want to do? As a business owner, you're front and center of communicating your brand. You should be able to enjoy what you do. And sometimes I think we forget to do just that. So the longer term benefits of a strategic approach to sales. And again, just to touch on this, I signed a consultancy agreement with Umi because I see the good that Umi are doing in many markets right across the UK. I'm passionate about that one little piece of business, which I believe is actually very grand, and that's sales. When I work with an organisation, I'm keen to look at the longer term. So many of us, not just in business, but in life, are always looking just at the end of our nose, and we're forgetting to be patient, whether that's with financial investments, whether that's with relationships, whether that's with our health, whether that's with expectations of ourselves. Businesses take time to be a success, and so too does a sales process. But by applying some of the key instruments that I've mentioned on this webinar today, you can look at things like increased growth. That's growth of revenue, growth of profit, and growth of your business through time. It means that you can expand your operations and create new opportunities for yourself, for your staff, and for your business overall, including its customers through time. You'll improve your reputation. That's important. The better your company's reputation, the more you're going to sell through time. And by the way, sometimes it's just a matter of being in the market in the long term. I've seen this in the past where the early years can be incredibly difficult because there aren't many early adopters. Depending on what it is that your business does and what it sells, how many people are going to truly want to buy that product for the first time and be the first person to do it? That takes risk takers. But through patience and working with a smaller band of customers, you can develop your messaging, your communications, and get the testimonials, for example, that you can then leverage into your market and into new markets to allow you to grow. Your reputation is important, and it's going to be improved as a byproduct of looking at your sales process through time. You'll be able to develop more business. If you optimize your sales activity, if you optimize the sales around your business, then you're going to be able to increase the amount of resources that you have to focus on critical areas of your organization. And it's going to allow you to improve your business planning as well. I've sat in meetings with my own businesses, startup organizations, where we've just not had the money to be able to do the things that we want to do. We've raised private investment, we've spoken to venture capitalists, we've spoken to banks, we've taken on debt into the organizations. Sometimes these are necessary. In actual fact, sometimes these are very positive instruments to consider for your business. But the very best thing to do is ask yourself, how do I wash my own face? How do I make sure that my organization sells a product through time in order that I can delve into my own pot of profit and spend it on the business? That allows me to plan better for the future and do more of what I'm good at. And then how do I ensure that I'm developing better customer relationships through time? At the end of the day, you want your customers to come back again and again. The more they trust you, the better your brand is, the better you communicate with them, the more your sales process will be refined, the more it will be refined around their needs, all with a view to achieving your North Star, all with a view to communicating what that why or that North Star is, not only to your customers, but to your team, and reminding yourself and the better relationships you're going to form through time that will benefit your business. Thanks very much for your time. I think we're bang on 42 minutes there. I'd be delighted to hear from you. I'd be delighted to answer any questions just now. My email address is on screen. I'd welcome anyone to reach out, give me some feedback on the presentation. You can book some time with me through Umi, through their SatNav service. I know that the team there will be sending you some follow-up literature, and that'll explain how you do just that. But again, thanks very much for your time. I don't know if there's any questions, Rory. I'd be happy to answer them if there are.